Greetings, classmates. I'm Sam Moore, here to present to you my research project for the History of Libraries course. And my topic is destruction. While reading the learner text, as well as reading Matthew Battle's Library and Unquiet History, for my book review, one of the things that I really kind of became fascinated with was ideas of destruction within libraries. Reading about, Chinese Imperial Library and serving the empire and the government, one of the things I started to think about was, well, what would it look like if you had a complete library owned and operated by like a government entity, and if it was to be destroyed, you would lose all of that culture and that knowledge. And so what I began to think of is, destruction not as the destruction of the physical building of a library, but of the knowledge and the information, the culture held within it. And what does that look like? What happens? And of course, we have various instances of this throughout history. So what I really want to look at is destruction, and then I've chosen the blog format, which I'll show you here in a second. But what I want to do with is look at different types of destruction, be it man-made destruction by one society against the other. Examples being the Nazis during World War II and the German Empire during World War I. And then also natural disasters, things that didn't happen, fires that destroyed. Obviously the famous example is, the Library of Alexandria, which is still today disputed, but, so we've got things like fires, natural disasters, earthquakes, but then instances of man-made destruction with, war, what's happening in the Middle East. So with that, I also want to look at specific examples of destruction. For instance, the picture here we've got here is a picture of the library of the Catholic University in the Belgian city of Louvain, which during World War I was actually burned and destroyed as part of a campaign by the Germans as they swept through Belgium to try to pacify the populace of Belgium. Obviously destroying tons of original work, tons of manuscripts, but there it is, that instance of destroying culture, of knowledge. But also look at instances like the burning of Alexandria in more detail and more depth. But also I want to look at instances of preservation. Instances in which individuals or societies kind of gathered together to find ways to preserve that knowledge and that culture in this instance of destruction. One of the things that comes to mind is the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives program during World War II, often nicknamed as the Monuments Men, but while not directly involving libraries, involves certain archives, but it was a group of men that recognized the need to preserve culture that was in the face of imminent destruction from war. Part of the Monuments Men, really grew out of smaller efforts in North Africa, as well as in Sicily and Italy, to preserve monuments that held specific cultural history. The famous one being during the Battle of Monte Cassino, where the monastery at Monte Cassino was destroyed, ironically by the Americans, who were under the impression that the Nazis were using it as a place to store troops, and that they were using it as a position to fire upon them, because it's actually set up in a huge cliff. And ironically, actually, the Nazis weren't using it. They were recognizing that it was this cultural center for them, and so they weren't using it. But once the Americans destroyed it, actually the Nazis then decided to use it as a firing point to fire down on the Allied troops. And it was really after that where there was concerted effort to try and create a program that would save some of that cultural identity. And throughout the invasion of Normandy and into the push into Germany, we see the Monuments Men going through and helping to preserve that cultural identity of Europe. So throughout, and here's just a list of examples which I will kind of go through throughout the blog. Each blog post will be a look at a larger expansion on these examples. For instance, the burning of Alexandria, the burning of Louvain in World War I. That's supposed to say World War II, but I guess there's a typo. But it was actually also destroyed again by the Nazis in World War II. The current destruction of cultural relics in the Middle East right now by ISIS, and then again looking at preservation programs like the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives program during World War II. But again, the thing about destruction and destruction library that really interests me is the idea that this is a very fragile system in which you have really a building that houses so much knowledge and so much potential, and that it could be snuffed out in an instant. It's a sad thought, and reasons behind why such destruction happens. And looking at these incidents, and maybe from looking at them in more depth, learning something from them, learning new preservation techniques to carry on to the future, but also recognizing that these centers are these librarians they're centers of knowledge and culture, and that they are very important. So here is the link to my blog. We will click it and it will take us straight to it. But The Bearded Librarian, which I kind of named joking, kind of half joke, kind of not. I wanted to pick something that would have more of a ring and draw more people to it than just, project for history of libraries destruction. But currently, right now, I've just got the first introductory post explaining the project, what I hope to, the scope I take. Here's more of the picture that I had on my presentation, which is the library at the Catholic University at Louvain. And then also a brief kind of about me post. Yeah, it's something that, even though there's only going to be 10 blog posts looking specifically at this this topic of destruction, I also, maybe potentially in the future use it to explore other things, and not just stop with those 10 blog posts after this class is done. But this is my project. I'm really excited to share with you some posts about destruction and the hope of preservation in the future.